This presentation is about designing and manufacturing of medical battery charger systems. Difference between how a battery was looked at in the medical world 20 years ago and what it's looked at like today. So, and I actually showed these two chargers here. This is a medical charger. We build it with an LP1000 defibrillator adapter for defibrillators. It was developed almost 20 years ago, but in the medical world, it's viewed as a commercial accessory to a medical device. Whereas this here, actually in the contract is written that it is a finished medical device. So it meets all the requirements and specifications and certifications of a medical device in its own right. And when I showed this to the guys at the show, I asked them, what do you think the biggest difference between these two products is? And it's actually that this one consists 90% of paper. So I think that's really the big major difference. So we start with the question of why do medical devices actually have batteries? And we've been dealing in both on the sales and marketing as well as in our operations with 4 different categories of medical devices that have batteries. It starts with the defibrillators that we've been doing for a long time, where the battery is actually an inherent part of the design of the defibrillator itself. And historically, these batteries have been viewed more as components than as their own medical devices. And they've been treated like components. We have the surgical tools, and the main reason why these have batteries today is because the batteries make them more mobile and allow new choreographies for the surgeons in the operating room that were previously not possible when you were tethered to the power cable. We have the life support systems that are very, very critical because they can't fail and where the battery provides backup power for safety. And then we have the monitoring and therapy systems where the backup is not critical to life, but is just there as a backup to be able to move the patient without interrupting therapy. So based on all of these categories, a lot of companies are moving into cut the cord initiatives, taking devices that were previously only powered by the grid and moving them to the battery. And there's more and more medical devices that are and will be battery powered. It's a vastly growing market. And to do that, we actually need to look at that power system with all 3 of its components: the battery pack and the battery pack design, the charger to be able to charge up that battery pack, and the life cycle and maintenance system for the battery. And that's a unique thing of Cadex, that we are the only company in the world that I'm aware of that actually has expertise in all 3 areas and can do the complete power system, including all the maintenance and diagnostics and analyzer products that go with it. So medical chargers and batteries today don't just power the device, and that's something that we're seeing more and more now as well, that the battery is not just a battery and the charger is not just a charger, because it has connectivity to the Internet of Things. It has update tools for the medical device software. So this is actually the update. Somebody actually at the show said, what you've got there is not a charger. It's a docking station for the medical device. And I thought that was actually a really neat and interesting term that they used. There's power conversion circuitry. There's authentication and safety features. There's medical device testing and checking features that actually monitor the actuators and motors in the medical device. And there's even talks of some of the consumables handling being managed through the actual unit of the battery pack. So based on that, batteries and chargers are medical devices. They're no longer looked at if they were just an accessory or just a component of a medical device, but we have to treat them as medical devices themselves. And for that reason, they're subject to FDA classifications, and some of you have been confronted with the Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 risk classification that go along with the FDA regulations. That's the CFR 820, 21 CFR 820. And based on those classifications, we have certain key challenges that we need to deal with when we're working with our medical device customers and developing a wireless or cableless solution for their medical devices. Regulatory being one of the primary and really complex ones that we'll go into in this presentation. Reliability, of course, being a consequence to that and being intricately connected to it. The whole topic of battery maintenance, which was mentioned earlier, and there's a final summary slide at the end of this presentation on that. And then the whole topic of sterilization in a medical device, which this presentation doesn't address. There's various different strategies, and if anyone can come up with an 18650 battery that can handle 200 cycles in an autoclave at full charge, then please let me know. That's the holy grail that the industry is still looking for. So when we look at compliance and certifications, there's 4 main categories that we have to work to, and where an organization like Cadex needs to change significantly from how it operated when it was purely doing accessories and commercial products. The first one is our quality management system. It must be compliant to ISO 13485 and to be able to satisfy the requirements of the FDA, and this can be audited and is audited regularly by the FDA, the standard 21 CFR Part 820. CFR is the Code of Federal Regulation, which is a congressional code which defines the rules by which the FDA operates. It is very vague compared to something like 13485 and very challenging to interpret. Putting those two together and having a quality system that makes us capable of doing medical devices is quite challenging. The second item is the actual finished medical device. When we build a product like this, it needs to pass all kinds of different certifications. The big milestone for the complete medical system is the 510K, or pre-market authorization for the US, for North America. That is the official go-ahead from the FDA to our final customer that they are allowed to market and sell this as a medical device. Until they have this, they are not allowed to market and call this a medical device. It's the really key benchmark that gets them from having just a project and some R&D to an actual product, so that has line of sight to revenue. In other countries, there's different regulations in every country. The CE regulations for Europe are somewhat corresponding to this process of this 510K and the PMA, and there's different national ones in every country. There's the safety certifications that you're all familiar, and these are the international ones. Every country has a different version of it. There might be one CSA and then the same number for Canada, but they're mainly identical. And then there's, of course, the MI certifications that we deal with as well. Then we look at the design process, and there are 2 main standards that define the design process for medical products. The one is the software design process, and I have 2 separate slides on that because it's something that we've done quite a bit of learning on. That's the IEC 62304. And then there's the whole topic of risk management. And those are, again, the things that are different compared to our conventional product design processes that we've had in the past. And then the last thing is manufacturing. And in manufacturing, there are 3 main standards, or packages of rules, I'm going to call them, because they aren't really certifications. They're packages of rules and deliverables. And that's the CGMP, which stands for Current Good Manufacturing Processes, which again is a bit of a vague cloud that is defined and changes over time, that defines what is current practice in manufacturing, what is the level of due diligence, the level of standards that a reliable organization manufactures to. And then there's the PPAP, which is the production parts approval process. And that is the entire body of proof that we need to create that every process we do in manufacturing has been stabilized so that it will always create the same result. That every charger we build on that process has the same result and the same quality and the same critical to quality parameters. And last but not least, the device history record, which is the package of paper that goes with every shipment that we do with the customer to the customer. And that's the difference between these two, and why this one is 90% paper. That's that package of paper that gives us all the traceability and all the information to ensure that if anything happens later on in the field, it can be traced back who did what on this and how was it done, and was it all done according to the rules and standards to ensure that we don't run into liability issues. So let's start with the software design process. This looks very similar to the risk classes of the FDA. There's class 1, class 2, and class 3. But it's actually very, very different because the FDA classification, class 1, 2, and 3, are risk classes for an entire device or an entire medical system. This is not a classification of a system. This is a methodology to manage the risk of software. And basically what they say is, you start by assuming any line of code in your system is risk class C. And you have to start your development with that assumption and say, if I assume all of this is risk class C and it can cause serious injury of death, let's go and see, can I prove that the whole thing doesn't? Can I prove that a certain section of it doesn't? And break it down all the way to lines of code or whatever depth you can do to try and prove that the software or certain sections of it are only class B or class A. And the reason this is so key for the development process for us is that the effort difference between A, B, and C is enormous. We're estimating about a 3x effort to go from one step to the other, but the amount of documentation, of unit testing, of tracking requirements in minute detail through every step of the development process down, and then later of the verification process back up here in this software development model. That effort is infinitely higher if you don't manage to downgrade the classification of these software modules or the entire body of software on the get-go. So what that means for the strategy when you're doing a battery and charger system is that if at anyhow possible, when we're working in the front end with our medical device manufacturers, what we want to do is we want to convince them to downgrade the charger to a class A and move the risk mitigation efforts into the battery where it can be done more with hardware and with systems that don't involve these huge levels of effort on the software development side in the charger, because the charger software is quite a bit more complex. So just a little bit about the strategy when we implement the development process there. Second thing is the production part approval process. And that is really, how do we get from a finished design, when the hardware and the software team have the finished product and say, here's my prototype, this is exactly what it needs to look like and how it needs to work, to a functioning factory, building a factory. And I've taken the different steps and kind of combined and summarized them a little bit. This could be a little boring, but I'm just going to click through and list them. What we have to do to get from A to B. These steps are all documents. So it starts with the complete set of design specifications, final design specifications, which include all the critical parameters and tolerances. The design FMEA, verifying where are the risks in the design. Manufacturing process flow chart, which defines the high-level process of how to manufacture the product. The process FMEA, which assesses and mitigates all the risks in the manufacturing process. The process quality control plan, which defines exactly on every step of the process what are the measures we're taking to control and monitor the quality. The measurement systems analysis, that's the documentation to ensure that the tools that we're using to measure if we're inside the parameters of the specification, that those tools are actually capable of verifying that and reliable. The sample production parts that need to be provided, the first article inspections, the process capabilities analysis, so every one of those processes, be it the ultrasonic welding process or the spot welding process, we need to assess what are the variances, what are the process capabilities, are they stable? Are we sure that if we build 1,000, 1,000,000 pieces with the same process, that all of them are really going to be good? The process validation, the IQ, OQ, PQ process there, compliance and certifications for every component. We need to make sure that we have the certificates of conformance, the RoHS, the REACH, the Frank Dodd conflict minerals, and what else comes out of there. The preventative maintenance plan for all the equipment, and this all has to be submitted to the customer and has to be available for the FDA to inspect. The run rate demonstration that we do in the end to verify that we can service the market, and then once all of that is done and approved and finalized by our OEM partners, we can finally go into production with our PQ builds. So if we look at the battery line, that shows all the key steps for an example of a medical battery production, starting with the offline assemblies, like the negative offline assemblies, the PTC assemblies that are done off the line as sub-assemblies, and the glued offline assembly. We then have the cell welding, we have the electromechanical assembly, we have the ultrasonic chassis welding, we have the burn-in and test, we have the laser marking and labeling, and then we have the packaging at the very end of the process. And each of these processes have several steps. You actually do the process, and we have to ensure that the process is reliable, and we have to have a testing and verification of the process. So for example, if we look at the ultrasonic welding here, there's a no-go, no-go jig here where you throw the battery through and you see, was that process actually successful? So on each of these processes, we have to verify always that these processes were successful, so that every single battery that comes out the end of that packaging meets all the requirements. And all of these process parameters for doing this step, as well as the results of all the tests, they all go through the network that our test and manufacturing engineering team built into a common file, onto a file server, and are tracked by serial numbers. We have these little readers here, so we know exactly who did what, who did the mechanical assembly of this serial number of battery at this time, what were the exact parameters of the burn-in, what were the forces on the ultrasonic welder, and can track all this down in minute detail so that if there's ever any issue in the field, we can contain any problems that might have been in the production process for a medical product. And all of this data and documentation then comes together off of this line, and it produces the actual battery itself, and it produces the production and test data, which is congealed into a device history record, which is now or will be semi-automated or pretty automated in its production. And that device history record consists of, and that will be issued and signed by the quality team and goes with every shipment to the customer. It'll contain the manufacturer's information, it'll contain the product information, part number, lot ID, lot quantity, date, and serial numbers, and it'll contain all the manufacturing and test records. So that's the bill of material, the exact set of specs it was made to, so that each delivery will show which version of the specs it was built to, any rework deviation data, equipment and all the setup logs of the process so that they can be assigned to which setup were they built under, the equipment calibration data to ensure that anything we used to measure this was actually calibrated, the traceability records for all the lot codes and serial numbers, the incoming inspection report, the final inspection reports for all of the components in there, the labeling acceptance, any SPC statistical process control data that shows stability of our manufacturing processes, the work order kit record, and the manufacturing test systems result. Then there will be deviation reports, if there are any deviations that were approved by the customer. There will be an acceptance statement, and then the whole thing will have a heavy signed in blood signature from our quality manager, Lewis, on it to make this thing official, because this is a contract. This is a promise from us. This is our holy oath that we have done everything on this shipment according to the rules and the plans. And that's a really important part, and that's why a medical product is much more effort to produce than a commercial product, because we don't just have to do it right, we have to actually prove and provide and collect the proof that we did it right on everything. So apart from actually making the battery, the last element that's really key is the whole topic of the battery maintenance. So once our customers roll these out into the market, they have to have a strategy on when to use a battery and when not to use it anymore, and when to throw it away. And this is really Calyx's home turf. This is what Isidore has been teaching the world for 35 years, that there are very, very intelligent ways to do this. The medical industry is still at the very beginning in using very, very simple methods for this, and I'll go into 3 of the simple methods that are being used, and then talk a little bit about Calyx's more refined and some of our proprietary methods. So the simplest one is the fixed expiry. That's very easy to manage and implement. You either put an expiry date once it reaches the 1-year or 2-year term. The battery's expired, you throw it away, no matter if it's good or not. Most batteries are thrown away when they've only reached about 40 to 50% of their life cycle in the medical world. So you're throwing away, you're creating twice as much garbage, you're throwing away half of the money and the value that's in the battery by doing that. Cycle count is the other alternative. A lot of surgical devices have a 200 or 300 cycle count. Even if the battery should be able to do 500, 600, 700 cycles, it's thrown away or even physically disabled after 200 cycles. Second strategy are also very simple tests, just looking at voltage and impedance. They're very, very inaccurate. They only catch certain problems with batteries. They're not very good at catching capacity fade and aging, and are not very often used as an actual decision criteria in the medical industry. In fact, I'm not familiar with any project where it's used. They're used in automotive and some other markets where failures are non-critical. And then the third one, which is emerging, is the whole SM bus, using the digital models that are built into the gas gauge of the battery. Those are coming more and more, but they're still quite unreliable, and they don't necessarily meet the verification and validation requirements of the FDA. So we've seen some of our customers that actually want to drive these products and drive these decisions through the full charge capacity, which is essentially something like state of health in the SM bus, but then ultimately pull back and go back to voltage-based solutions or fixed expiry solutions, because they say we just don't understand all possible use scenarios of this battery. And that's really the problem. Batteries are used in so many different ways that you can't predict what that's going to do to their state of health. So apart from these, I'd say commercial solutions that are out of the box, Calyx offers 3 different strategies for managing battery maintenance. The first one is all the quick tests, which are essentially the fingerprint analysis of the chemical batteries, the work that Tina and our research team are working on. EIS, so the spectrotechnology is one of them, the time domain analysis, so the quick sort technologies that we have, and there's a couple others that we're looking at. The second one is the full cycle test. So that is the gold standard out of all of the methods to determine the state of health of the battery. That is the only fully reliable one. That's the only method that will give you 100% reliable solid data. The downside of it is you have to take the battery and run it through a whole cycle, and that takes a very, very long time. And in the use cycle, in the normal day-to-day use cycle, that is usually not possible. It's something you can just do as a maintenance run every 3 months or something like that, and that's typically where those find their application. And then last but not least, the new project that our team here and Tina is working on, which is the charge curve analysis, the Cadex Parser. So this is a new algorithm that will analyze during the charge process the behavior of the battery to determine state of charge at the beginning of the charge process, and will allow us essentially to do a full cycle without going all the way down first. So it'll basically do a half cycle and be able to calculate the part of the cycle that's missing. So the neat thing about this is it can get us very close to the accuracy of this, simulating this, but it uses the part of the full cycle that the end user is going to be using anyway, which is charging it from 1/3 full all the way full. And so it doesn't cost any extra time at all, because it's just using the time that you're going to spend charging the battery up anyway. So yeah, that is an interesting new technology that is still a little bit of science fiction, but possibly not for very long. And we feel that this has quite some opportunity in the medical field to possibly replace something like the fixed expiry solutions and extend the life of batteries double, which can reduce the price per procedure for surgical procedures quite significantly, because many of these medical batteries are more than $1,000 a piece, so that's quite a lot of money. So with that, thank you for taking the time for this quick lunch and learn.